Good morning and welcome back. So today's video for part 2 of Sourdough 101 is going to be a quicker one. This is going to go over the equipment and specifically the equipment needed versus the splurge items, because if you've watched me any length of time, you know I love thrifting stuff. So I always like to give the lower priced version of how to do things before the higher price, and always, if there's a way to get it thrifted, I am all about doing that. So we'll get started. There are only a couple things that you actually need to be successful in making sourdough bread. The first thing being a scale. This came from Amazon. The one before this came from Walmart. I think this one was $13, and I will leave everything linked down in the description box, but it doesn't have to be anything expensive as long as it'll do grams. The second thing you need is some sort of bowl. They were either handed down, thrifted, or I just already had them. So for a mixing bowl, I like to use big bowls. I like them to be wider and deep so that you can really do your stretch and folds and mixing and everything and just have plenty of room. Both of these can fit double batches in as well, which I like to do 2 batches at once because one loaf lasts one day. And so I'm not able to put anything back in the freezer if I'm just doing 1 loaf a day. My favorite type of bowls to use are pottery, Pyrex, or glass. You could also do plastic if you wanted to go that route. That is perfectly fine. I know a lot of people are getting away from plastic, and I do have a lot less plastic than I used to, but there's still a couple items that I just really like, and I haven't gotten rid of them yet. So no judgment here, but don't use metal because that's going to react with your sourdough. So don't use metal. And then the only other thing you technically need is, again, a bowl to proof your dough. So the way that the sourdough works, and we'll go step by step in the third and final video, but you need a bowl to mix all your stuff in, and then you want to have a bowl that's going to be your shaping bowl, essentially. So this is going to be a smaller bowl. I could mix my sourdough, let it do its rise in here, give it its stretch and folds, let it cold proof or proof on the counter for its last final rise, and I could even shape it in this. However, you're not gonna get the result that you're wanting. The only exception would be if I was doing like a baguette or something or like bagels or English muffins, to where I don't need to shape it into a loaf style, then I'm not gonna care, and it'll just stay in the same bowl the entire time. But if you're wanting to do like a round loaf or the log-shaped loaves, then you're gonna want something smaller. The first type of bowl is a banaton bowl. This I thrifted. It was $2 at Salvation Army, and it comes with this removable liner. And so you just put your flour, like sprinkle it with flour, shape your loaf, put your loaf in here, and then let it do its last final rise, and then you bake it off. Another way you can do it is to just get a smaller bowl. Now this can be, again, any type of bowl. I've even done my little soup bowls because I wanted to make bread bowls so that I could have a lot of little mini loaves. So it really is just use your imagination, but the smaller, the better. Now, if you don't have a liner and you want a liner, I advise just getting a pack of flour sack towels. Anything lint-free is going to work. You just don't want anything with lint because then the lint is going to get on your bread. But if you're wanting to use just any size bowl, I always put the flour sack towel like this, and then I'll sprinkle it with flour, and then I just plop my dough right in, and it'll sink into the bowl, and it'll also kind of coat the sides with that flour so nothing is going to stick. And then you can really easily, which I will show you, you can really easily just flip this over top, so you not only have your liner, but you also have your cover. And of course you can still use these just to cover your dough when it's rising, but you can also use any, like I said, any type of lint-free. For the longest time before I bought flour sack towels, I was just using some of my fabric that I had. And the last thing you need for bread would be some sort of razor or very sharp knife to be able to score it so that your bread can vent properly. And the reason we do this, and you do it with yeast spreads too, if you're making a French bread or a baguette, is you're essentially telling that bread dough where you want it to open up and vent at. Otherwise, it's just gonna bust any random place. It's not going to form correctly, and it's just easier, just score it. So this is the one that I have, and I will try to link it down below if I can find it. My husband actually got it for me for Christmas, and it came in a 5-pack. So these razors are removable, and so you just use it until the razor gets dull, and then you remove it and put a new one on. So this is what I like. It was fairly inexpensive. I think he paid $10 for it. But if you don't want to get one of these right away, that is fine. Just use some sort of sharp knife. But this is going to be a more necessity versus not. But if you have a really sharp knife, that will work. These are just real convenient, especially if you want to start doing designs and stuff. So that's technically all you need to get, oh, and of course the starter. But that's all you need to get started with sourdough. Let's go into more splurgy items, and these, I actually don't have one of them, and unless one is gifted to me, I'll probably never own one. And that would be a Danish whisk. They are super cool looking, and for the longest time, I had it in my Amazon cart when I was first getting into sourdough, and I was like, yes, I need this, I need this. But I don't. And you really don't. It's just one of those things to where I could just use a regular whisk. I could use a wooden spoon. I could use my hands. Now, some people don't like getting their hands dirty, and I respect that, but I use my hands for all the sourdough mixing. Like any type of sourdough mixing for any type of recipe, I'm using my hands, unless it's like brownies, and then I'm using a whisk, which is where you see a lot of people using the Danish whisk are for like batter type recipes. I just use a whisk or a spoon or my hand. So that's one thing. The second thing is a bench scraper. Now, does this come in handy at times? Yes. Is it absolutely necessary to make a delicious loaf of sourdough bread? No. People will use the bench scraper for a couple different things. First, they'll use it if you've shaped your dough, and then you can scoop it up and plop it in your final proofing bowl. That's one way people use it. Another way people will use it is to help shape your dough. But I'm going to show you for my master recipe how I shape it without needing this at all. The main reason I would use this to shape my dough is if I was trying to make a really, really high hydration loaf, which ironically is how I first tried to do sourdough. I was using a really high hydration, and I was coming across a lot of issues because I wasn't using the bench scraper. I was trying to do my hand method of shaping when I needed this. So if you're wanting to do a higher hydration, that's going to come in handy. It also is nice to like cut. You'll see in a lot of my bread recipes, not just sourdough, I'm using this to cut my dough into sections because it is nice for that. But again, absolutely necessary? I don't think so. But that is it on equipment. Now, real fast, I want to go over a couple different terms that you're going to come across whenever you start making sourdough. So the first one being autolyse or autolyse. I've heard it pronounced both ways. I'm not sure which one's correct, if either of them are correct. But all it is a rest period after you mix your flour, water, and starter together. So you mix all that together, and then anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour, you just let it rest. I always just opt for the hour, no matter what the recipe that I'm following says. I just let it rest for an hour, and I find I just have the best results. All it's doing is resting before you add the salt. Now, there are exceptions to this. There are recipes that have you add all ingredients at once. Sometimes I follow them that way, sometimes I don't, but if I'm making my everyday bread, I always let it rest for that hour before adding the salt. It'll change the structure of your dough, so you really want to give it that rest first, and it just really helps. The second thing is low hydration and high hydration loaves. The main difference between a low hydration and a high hydration is the amount of water that you are putting in your dough. So a high hydration has a much higher percentage of water versus the lower hydration is going to be a much firmer dough to work with versus a really loose dough. And my master recipe is actually like, it's perfect mesh in between because I prefer higher hydration doughs. They're harder to work with at the end when you're shaping because they're stickier, but I love the outcome of a higher hydration. They are just what I prefer. If you like that soft sourdough with the open crumb, which that's just like the holes, and if that's what you like and that's what you think of when you think sourdough, then you want to lean towards the higher hydration. Otherwise, if you're wanting a more solid crumb, if you're wanting something more like a sandwich bread, for instance, is a low hydration sourdough loaf. This is whole wheat, and I did it low hydration, and it has a small crumb dispenser, and you can easily slice this and make grilled cheese, whatnot, without your cheese going through your onto your pan and through your bread. That is a lower hydration loaf and a small crumb. But for my master recipe, it is like a perfect mesh in between. It's going to give you some holes without being like a really open crumb. It's like the perfect marriage of the two. But that, I think, oh, stretch and folds. So I'll go over more about this when we're actually doing it, but all that is essentially the sourdough version of kneading. You are creating that gluten structure by doing your stretch and folds, and there are many different ways and techniques for doing that. I'm just going to show you the basic one, but it's something that we're doing instead of kneading it with like a bread hook or kneading it on our counter by hand, because we really want it to have bubbles in it and create that airy texture that's going to give us the sourdough bread texture that we're looking for. But that is everything for day 2, which is a few days late, and I hope you enjoyed. If I forgot anything or didn't explain anything well enough, just let me know in the comments. And then I will have the part 3, which is the sourdough bread loaf recipe, and I hope everyone that hasn't started their sourdough starter goes ahead and starts it so that we can all be making wonderful, delicious sourdough recipes this year with our active sourdough starter and our discard. I hope everyone has a wonderful Monday, and I will see you all in my next video. Thanks for watching.